These big furry balls saved my bottom end.
No, stop messing about.
No, Kenneth, I'm not joking. These big furry balls really did save my bottom end. If you want to find out how, keep on watching. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this, the last episode of the studio garage conversion home studio build. In this episode, we are going to be looking at calibrating my studio monitors using two pieces of software, REW Wizard, or REW for short, and Sonarworks. So let's focus on REW Wizard first. What is REW Wizard? REW Wizard is an analysis/diagnostic software. It is designed to measure the response of your speakers in a room and will give you a frequency output, a frequency graph, as well as lots of other measurements to tell you how your speakers actually sound in your room, in your listening position. So there's two important kind of things that we're going to be looking at from my perspective anyway, instead, from regards to setting up this studio. We're going to be looking at the frequency response of my monitors, and then the decay time via a waterfall graph, which is how long it takes those frequencies to actually decay and become quiet and disappear basically in the room. Those are the two main things we're going to be looking at. If you don't know anything about REW Wizard, don't worry about it. This isn't going to be it's just giving you a sort of a high level overview of what I've done in the room to get to my listening position and to get what I think is the best I can get out of such a small room. If you want to know what REW Wizard a measurement looks like, I will pop in some footage of me doing a quick little REW measurement just to give you an idea of what the software actually measures. So I'm going to insert that now. So that's what REW Wizard does, essentially. You can tailor the sweeps, those are called sweeps. You can tailor those sweeps from very short. Sonarworks does very short sweeps. They're just like whoop, whoop, whoop. But the longer you make those sweeps, the kind of more accurate the results are from what I've researched and read anyway. So that's what a REW measurement looks like and sounds like when you do it. Now we're going to pop over to the desktop and we're actually going to look at what the graphs and what the data looks like to help you sort of analyze your room. So we're going to pop over to the desktop now and actually have a look at the software. Okay, so this is REW Wizard software. Just to give you a brief overview of what you're looking at. These are my measurement files on the left, but the graph, it's the table here that's the important bit. So vertically, this is sound pressure level, or decibels, essentially. So we're going from quiet. So at the minute, this graph is going from 65 decibels up to 88 decibels. You can tailor this to suit your needs. But so you've got loudness, essentially, on the vertical graph. And then from left to right, you've got your low frequencies. So this goes from 30 hertz, and then we go up to the trebles, up to the 20 kilohertz. So you've got loudness and then frequency left to right. On the waterfall charts, let me just, because it's going to show something in a minute. Just ignore what you're seeing for now. But you can see a frequency response. So this shows you bass all the way up through the mid-range up to the high frequencies. So it's the same. It's exactly the same. You've got your sound, you've got your decibels on the vertical. So at the minute, this is showing 30 decibels up to about 100. You've got your frequencies from the low 30 hertz up to the highs 20 kilohertz. So exactly the same as the other table. But then you've got this back to front component, this 3D component. So at the back, this is time, essentially. So this back to front axis is time. The Z-axis is time. So you've got 0 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, 200, 300, 400, up to 500 milliseconds, which is essentially half a second. So this is how long that frequency at any point in this graph takes to decay and disappear in the room. So we'll go back, we'll come on to that now. So I've taken a hell of a lot of measurements. One, I've never used the software before, so it's taken me a long time. It's taken me a good couple of weeks for pennies to drop and to actually get used to making consistent measurements. So you'll see the first couple of measurements aren't quite at the correct level, but the response is still valid. It's just they're not quite as loud as I'd want them to be, because they're not at the level I'd be mixing and mastering at. But they're close enough. But at that point, I was just getting used to the room. So what we're going to do, we're going to take you through my original position, which was at 38%. So I took 2 measurements there, again, because the software was very new to me. So we're going to look at the 38% position, and we're going to discuss my initial findings, and that's where these will come in later. But so we're going to discuss my initial findings. Then we're going to move on to the second position I moved to, which was position 1 on my tape markings. If you've watched the previous videos of this where you saw me setting up my speaker stands and my listening position, you saw that I had 3 equilateral triangles on the floor, basically. So the next set of measurements is from the P1 position in that layout, which is the speakers have been moved back towards the front wall in front of me. So then we look at what change that made, and then some sort of findings and some discoveries. And then we're going to look at my final position for both sets of monitors, because I've got the Alesis Monitor One Mk2s that are easily 15 to 20 years old-ish. Probably closer to about 17 years old, maybe. So they're old, but they're fantastic studio monitors, and they go all the way down. I'm not sure. I would have to look at their spec. I'd have to find an old legacy document for them to find out what their actual frequency response is. But they can easily handle 30 hertz. So they do go down low enough for the type of music that I write. And then my second set of studio monitors, they're passive studio monitors. And then I've got a second set of new, I only bought them last year, new PreSonus Eris 4.5 BTs. And I think the BT stands for Bluetooth, because they've got Bluetooth connectivity. They're a set of active monitors. They don't, and you'll see this in the measurements at the end, they don't handle the low end very well at all, and they only seem to start being able to produce bass frequencies around the 50 hertz mark. They don't, and you can hear it when Room EQ is actually taking the measurement. That sweep, that whoop, you can hear it. It sounds completely different from that initial 30 hertz up to about 50, 60 hertz. It sounds like it can't do it. It almost sounds like a mid-rangey tone coming out of them rather than a low-end bass tone. It sounds completely different. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at my initial position. This is the initial position at the 38%. So let me turn these on, set my zero at 75 decibels, because that's what the tone that came out of the speakers was at the time. So what you can see is overall, up until this 120 hertz mark, it's pretty good actually. You've got plus, so in case you don't know, I think the accepted, or again from what I've researched, is that for a good home studio in a small room, you're looking at between 4 and 6 decibels, plus or minus 4 or 6 decibels for a good, decent room. So up until that 120 hertz hole, I'm pretty good, actually. I'm plus or minus 3 decibels. You know, there's a 4 decibel bump there, but everything else is pretty much plus or minus 3 decibels, which I think that's pretty good. You know, from what I'm looking at here, that's pretty good. But we do now have to discuss, I've got this huge, massive bump at the peaks at the 60 hertz range. So we were looking at almost 11 decibels increase, which is huge. So that's a problem that needs looking at. And then I've got this hole at about just over 100 hertz, 110, maybe 120 hertz. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decibels. So that's a 6 decibel hole at 110 to 120. And then an almost 11 decibel bump at the 60 hertz mark. But it covers that, you know, it goes from, 40 hertz up to 60, and then doesn't come back down to within plus or minus 3 until 80 hertz. So there's this huge bump here and then this hole. So let's have a look at the waterfall chart, and you can only see, even though you can see both graphs in this, a waterfall chart will only display one, and it's easier to read when it's just one. So this is the left speaker. So what you can see is overall, and you can see the same graph curve at the top as you can there. It matches that there. So you can see the hole there at 110, 120 hertz. And then you can see the huge bump then at from 30 up to 60. So that matches. So what you can see overall is I've got a pretty good response of under 200 milliseconds right up until this cluster here. There's these 4 slices that are resonating and are not decaying like the rest of the graph. Pretty much, just for that hole, which is a separate issue. But you've got these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slices. You've got these 6 resonances here that are not decaying like the rest of the graph. And then obviously then you've got this huge resonance at 60 hertz that's taking a long time to decay, which is probably the room mode, the low room mode back to front. That it's a small room and I'm probably not going to be able to do much about. But we shall see whether I can do anything about it. And then you've got another decay. You got another big latency waterfall then at the 30 hertz mark, and then it actually drops off pretty good in between. But it looks like you've got 30 hertz and 65 hertz that are problematic, and then this thing here, which we'll come on to later as well. So that's essentially what my room was like at the 38%. So I did a bit of reading around. And I have to shout out Jesco at Acoustic Insiders. Fantastic YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description. Fantastic YouTube channel. Fantastic resource for people building home studios and trying to make the best out of budget, acoustic treatment, DIY acoustic treatment, understanding the differences like between diffusion and absorption and all that kind of stuff. Brilliant resource. Online resource, fantastic. I can't recommend them enough. But I went back and I watched some more of Jesco's videos. Also Acoustic and Audio University as well. And I think PresentDayProduction and Jesco helped me do the bass hunter thing that I mentioned in a previous video, where you put one speaker in the corner, only one speaker, you play some tracks that you know very well, and then you basically move back and forth your center line until you find where the bass response is at its most natural and flat, and then you mark that as your sort of starting point. But I went back through a couple of Jesco's videos and I familiarized myself with something called boundary interference. So that is where the sound coming out of your speaker bounces off the front wall and then reflects back at you and interferes with the signal that came out of the speaker originally, and it creates an interference at a specific frequency that can actually nullify that particular frequency. So that's what you're seeing here. This is boundary interference reflecting off the front wall behind the speakers and then interfering at this particular point. So I decided then to play around with the speaker position, and then I moved the speakers back to that position 1 equilateral triangle. So everything moved back basically towards the back wall or the front wall about 10-15 centimeters. So what we'll do now is I'll overlay, and these are going to be at different levels unfortunately, but what you want to pay attention to is this primarily, and this curve here. So I'm just going to turn on the position 1 settings, and then I'll just drop this down a bit. So even though they're at different levels, when I put the center line in, because this was done at 69 decibels, what you'll notice now is that the dip at 110 hertz is now only -3 decibels. It's introduced a little bit more of a dip here compared to there. And then this bump at around 150 hertz has increased, to 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5, just under 5 decibels. And then it's introduced some small variations, in the treble and mid-range. But again, still the majority of it is still ±3, apart from that little bit there on the right speaker. So this is the right speaker curve highlighted. So you've got that bump there that's over -3 decibels, and this one here. But overall it's still pretty good, and we've reduced this, although as a consequence we've increased this one slightly. And the bass response is a tiny bit better along that kind of 40 hertz mark. So if I turn the original 38% off and we go to the left speaker and we have a look at the waterfall chart, what you'll see is now that looks a bit better. You can see there that the decay time is way over 500 milliseconds around that 60 hertz mark. But on the position 1, everything's decreased dramatically. That's a massive improvement. So I still got this issue and I've got this resonance. So let's tackle these one at a time. I've read or I've watched videos that these can help in a very specific circumstance. And I've got that very specific circumstance. The Alesis Monitor One Mk2s have rear firing bass ports. And they just happen to be the perfect size for a tennis ball. So I've heard that if you block bass ports, they can help control the low frequency output of that speaker. So I've got my doggies tennis balls, and they were the perfect fit because you had to rotate them and squeeze them in a little bit, but they were the perfect size for those bass ports. So that was the cheapest thing I had available that I didn't have to spend any money on. They were in the back of the car in the dog's bag. So I just got 2 tennis balls, and I'll just insert some footage here now of what that actually looks like from a previous bit of video I shot that shows you how the tennis balls are in that bass port at the back. I went in the dog's bag and I stuffed a tennis ball down in the bass port on both sides. What a very free, because I already had them, but also very cheap thing to do. They are the absolute perfect size. So that's what tennis balls in a bass port look like. Before I show you the difference, I've also got, let me put those down, I've also got these resonance slices here where I was trying to figure out what it was. Didn't look like it was anything to do with boundary interference or anything like that. I kind of knew what it was, actually, if I'm being honest, because I could kind of hear it in the room at the time. So as you can see, or if you've noticed at all and watched any of the music I actually produce on this channel, I'm an acoustic guitar player. I've got 6 acoustic guitars in this room. And I kind of knew really that these acoustic guitars were vibrating under certain frequencies. And I think that that's what you're seeing here. These are my acoustic guitars vibrating and resonating under certain frequencies and causing those frequencies to last longer in the room, essentially, because I've got 6 hollow bodies with holes in them that allow sound to bounce around and continue to make sound and reverberate. So for my final position, I left the tennis balls in the bass ports. I moved the speakers further back, as close as I could get them to the acoustic panels that are on the back or that are on the front wall. And then I basically took every acoustic instrument out of the room, all 6 acoustic instruments out. I've got an electric bass there that isn't going to make any difference really, so I just left that there. But all the acoustic instruments got taken out of the room. So what you're going to see now is my final position at the correct decibel level. And then we're going to look at how that's changed the frequency response in the room and how it's changed the decay times in the room, the waterfall graph. So this is the position 1, and then I'm going to turn on. So this is my final position on the Alesis monitors, and they were done at 78 decibels. So what you can see now is that is a dramatic reduction in the bass. I mean, that is just a phenomenal difference. If I go back to, if I turn these off, and actually let's just focus on one speaker. So this is my final position left speaker. So you can see and then this is the original 38%. That is an enormous. That's literally what you're seeing there is stuffing a tennis ball into the bass, into the rear firing bass port of my monitors. That is an absolutely phenomenal improvement, because now the 30 hertz is just a little plus 4 decibel spike, but then it immediately drops off and it drops down to just minus 3 decibels. I've improved the 100 hertz, 110 hertz response as well. The boundary interference is now much improved because the speakers are closer to the front wall. So that's now only minus 4 decibels. I've got a small increase then of plus 4 on that 150 hertz bump. Yeah, it's gone from plus 3 decibels to plus 4, which is a 1 decibel increase, which overall isn't that bad. It has amplified this little dip here slightly at about 280, 290. But again, 1, 2, 3, that's 5 decibels. So that's okay. But, Sonarworks is going to hopefully resolve a lot of this anyway. And then I'm again plus or minus 3 decibels, apart from there, which is 3.5. But overall, that is a huge, huge improvement just by using a tennis ball. And the guitars have been taken out of the room. So that's probably had an effect in this area as well. But let's have a look at the waterfall chart. So this is the original waterfall chart from my original 38% position on the left speaker. And then that is the waterfall response for my final position with the tennis ball and all the guitars taken out of the room. If you've got acoustic instruments in your room when you're mixing and mastering, take them out. Just remove anything that's acoustic or hollow or can resonate. Violins, ukuleles, banjo, just get rid of them. Put them out in the hallway, put them in a different room while you're mixing and mastering. While there's sound coming out of the speakers and you want to know what's actually coming out of the speakers, just get rid of all your acoustic instruments out of the room. I would hope that visually that is a dramatic indication of why you should do that, because that is a massive, massive difference. Even the 60 hertz response now is, what's that? Just over 400 milliseconds. I've still got a huge, and I just think that there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about the 30 hertz to 40 hertz range. That is just a consequence of having such a small room, and the room mode back to front is just right in that 30 to 40 hertz range, and I just don't have enough space to put bass traps in that would be deep enough that I could get that under control. But I can live with that, Sonarworks is hopefully going to help alleviate a little bit of that by flattening this out a bit, and it might just take it down a little bit. But it's there, and I play acoustic guitar and I sing, so I don't have a lot. I'm not playing EDM or anything like that. I don't write or produce EDM, so I'm not going to have a lot in my mixes that is going to sit in that frequency range anyway. So I'm hoping it's not a big deal, but hopefully I think that for what I've done in this room on a limited budget, with DIY panels, just cheap diffusers from Thomann, I think that is pretty good. So that's the left speaker. Let's just have a look at both speakers. So this is both speakers at 78 decibels. And again, fantastic. Under 200 milliseconds all the way down. Got a little increase in decay time. The 60 hertz is still just over 400 milliseconds. But again, it's that bump there. And that's both speakers, plus or minus 3 decibels, apart from there at about 280 and there at about, 136, 135, well, 140 actually, maybe 150. So overall, I think that's pretty good actually. I'm really pleased with that. So that's what a good set of passive studio monitors looks like. what I'll show you now is, so this is both speakers together at 78 decibels. What I'll do now is I'll show you the, let me go back to all SPL. Let me turn off that one. And then, so this is the Alesis, both speakers at the same time. So this is the stereo output. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to overlay the PreSonus Eris, which are much, much cheaper. I can't remember how much they cost, maybe 150. I think I'd have to have a look. I'll put it on the screen. But they're budget, they're beginner kind of speakers. But they sound nice, but you'll see now when I overlay this how they can't cope with the bottom end. So this is the highlighted is the PreSonus Eris. And as you can see, they simply cannot produce 30 hertz. And it's not up until you get to about 40, 45 hertz that they actually start to be able to produce the frequency response. But it's not up until, and then you've just got this huge bump then from 60 hertz all the way up to like 85, and it doesn't taper off until start tapering off until 90 hertz, and then you've got a little then it flattens off a little bit, but then you've got this big sort of bump in the treble from 3K to 5K. But yes, you can see the bass response, it can't cope with the low frequencies that the Alesis monitors can. But if we look at the waterfall chart, so this is the Alesis, and then these are the PreSonus. So even the PreSonus are actually pretty good. That 60 hertz is a bit worse, but again, the PreSonus have actually got rear firing bass ports as well, but they're smaller ports. But I think I might be able to fix that the same way I did with the Alesis, but with buying squash balls. So I might buy some squash balls from a sports shop. I'll need to check the diameter of the bass ports, but I'm hoping a squash ball or even rubber bouncy balls from like a toy shop would be perfect, I think. But I just need to measure the diameter of the bass ports, because then I think doing the exact same trick on the PreSonus will resolve that issue in the bass response as well. But yes, that is Room EQ Wizard that shows you essentially what your speakers are actually doing in the room. So now what we're going to do, we're going to move on to Sonarworks. What the software can do for you, basically, to actually flatten all these little peaks and troughs out so that you get the flattest response possible, to give you the most accurate, uncolored sound coming out of your speakers. So we'll do that now. Okay, so this is Sonarworks. This is the final stage. This isn't the actual measurement part of the software. This is the actual virtual sound card part of the software, where your measurements are actually put in, and then you assign your outputs on the left-hand side here. So you tell Sonarworks, right, I want to create a profile with these outputs. So this is outputs 1 and 2 from my Focusrite Scarlett. And then the profile you saved in the measurement part of the software, you select it then at the top. So it's applying this profile to these outputs, essentially. That's what you've got. So these are outputs 1 and 2 these are my primary outputs 1 and 2 from my Scarlett into my Behringer amplifier out into the Alesis monitors. So that's, you can see channel 1 and channel 2, and I've got this profile assigned to it. So what you're seeing here, this is the measurement. This graph this chart is the measurement that Sonarworks took, that 20-minute process of taking 38 different measurements from various spots in a kind of a circle around your listening position. And then it does like some algorithmic sort of averaging or whatever to come up with this output graph. So as you can see, it's pretty similar in all respects to the Room EQ one. That should, yes. So you can see you've got that dip. You got that bump, dip, and then 2 little bumps into a larger dip. The bass response is slightly different. I'm not sure. I think that's where the speakers actually stop responding. I think this may go down as low as 30, probably down to 20 hertz. So the speakers clearly can't really do 20 hertz, and then you can see it then starts to... Yeah, so this is slightly different. Sonarworks produces a slightly different curve there, up to the 100 hertz bump. And then you've got that dip, and then you've got that double bump. Which looks fairly similar, actually. Yeah, fairly similar. So that's what Sonarworks does. And then this flat line is the target. So you can see down the bottom, you've got different targets. So in terms of targeting, obviously for recording music, you want as flat a response as possible. You don't want any coloration coming out of the speakers that will affect how the music you're recording sounds when it comes out. Because you want to know that if you adjust 100 hertz on a kick drum or something, that's exactly what you're getting. But it also does different targets. So a translation check is you can get Sonarworks to make this sound like something completely different. So if I select that, what you're looking at now is that these are 3 different car models. So if you were to, you can basically make your speakers sound like a car. I'm not really sure whether anyone uses this. There's probably better software out there. There are plugins for your DAW that would do this, like the Slate headphones, or Abbey Road Studio, or all the other various types of studio reference plugins that are out there. But you can create different curves, essentially, and it will adjust the curve to sound like a car environment. You can set it to, I think they're AirPods, so that's what AirPods would sound like. There's loads of different types. Just a typical over-the-ear, on-ear, and in-ear earbuds. That's a typical average of what an in-ear headphone would sound like. That's what a laptop speaker would sound like. So you can see laptop speakers don't produce anything underneath, 150 hertz. So that would give you the sound of a laptop. You can do smartphones. That's a smartphone average. So that's what a typical so you can basically see how your music translates onto other devices. So you can do TVs even. So that's what a typical TV would sound like. What else have they got? I just guessed there was a white noise or brown noise. I think that's pink noise, actually. Or is that -3? I think 3 is pink noise. That's pink noise, I think. But yes, so you can do all that. But obviously we don't want any of that. We want a flat response. So it just flattens off this to a flat response. And that's pretty much all there is to it. What Sonarworks does is it actually creates a virtual sound card in Windows. And then that's the output device, essentially. I can turn off the calibration. So it'll give me the raw sound that the speakers make in the room. And then I can turn it back on so you can actually sort of flip-flop and hear the difference. Yeah, and that's pretty much Sonarworks. The hardest, I mean, this is literally done for you. You don't do anything in this. You just choose what you want to use. But yeah, I mean, the hardest, the most time-consuming, laborious part of Sonarworks is literally just doing that 20-minute measurement pattern. Yeah, but I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, it's about 20 minutes. It doesn't even feel like that, actually. It may only be about 10. I never timed it, but, you know, and once you know the sort of process, it just becomes like muscle memory and you just kind of just do it. But that's Sonarworks. So I now have, and I have to say, the sound field on the Alesis are so much better than the PreSonus. As much as the PreSonus were great little monitors, when I was in the old house, I did actually have the Alesis, but they were up in the loft because I didn't really have a good amplifier to plug them into. So they sat in the loft for years, probably a good 10 years actually. So I had the PreSonus ones because they were reasonably priced and I could have them in the living room. But there's no contest. When I flip between the two on the Scarlett, the sound stage on the Alesis is just far superior. But again, the reason I've set both up is because it is nice to have a second reference point. So that's it. I've got 2 sets of calibrated studio monitors in as best a position as I can get them, in a studio, home studio. That's the best I could do with what I had available. It's been a long journey. I think this is now week 9 or 10, actually. I've been in here for a couple of weeks now. But it's just taken me a couple of weeks because of work and life and various other things to actually sit down and actually spend some time with REW EQ Wizard and Sonarworks and actually calibrate both sets of monitors. I had to fine-tune the speaker positions very slightly. Like the speakers weren't sat on the monitor stands exactly the same. So there was little differences in how they measured to the center line to where the microphone was. So it was just basically, I spent a good couple of hours a couple of nights ago, basically just fine-tuning, making sure everything was in the right position, the speakers measured up perfectly, and then I just basically sat here and did REW EQ Wizard and Sonarworks measurements for like an hour to get the results you've just seen. So I'm very pleased. That's it now. That's it. I'm done. This video series is now fin, as they would say at the end of a pretentious French film from the 1920s. Fin. We're done. I'm done. That's it. I've got no excuse now. I can start recording music again. I hope this has been informative, enjoyable, or quite interesting, as Mr. Stephen Fry or Miss Sandy Toxvig would say. Thank you very much for watching. But again, yes, this is how 2 furry balls can save your bottom end.
Good grief, it gets worse and worse.
Thank you for watching. Take care. Have a lovely day wherever you are. And maybe come back to the channel at some point and watch some new covers that I'm doing. And in the new year, there'll be an album, finally, that shouldn't have actually ever existed. But I can tell you about that another time. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye for now.